Have you ever wondered how far someone might go to protect their secrets? In a quiet New England town, a single gunshot shattered the peace of an unassuming morning, unraveling a tangled web of betrayal, desperation, and heartbreak. If you think you've heard it all, gripping affairs, cunning cover-ups, and devastating consequences, this harrowing saga might just change your mind. Let's journey to February 2008, where a chilling discovery set the stage for one of the most unsettling cases to ever hit the small community of Hanover, New Hampshire. In February of 2008, the quiet town of Hanover, New Hampshire, awoke to a tragedy that would shake its foundations and leave the community searching for answers. At just 6:45 a.m., 38-year-old State Trooper Lila Porter was found dead in her own home, discovered by none other than her teenage daughter, Emily Porter. The horrific scene was set in the kitchen. Lila lay in a pool of her own blood, a single gunshot wound to the chest, her service-issued firearm placed conspicuously near her hand in a desperate attempt to pass it off as a suicide. Emily, understandably terrified and distraught, dialed 911, her sobs and gasps punctuating the calm instructions of the operator. When local police arrived, alongside state investigator Detective Garrett Lynch, a serious, methodical investigator of 25 years, they immediately realized that something was off about the purported suicide. The way the firearm lay near Lila's lifeless hand was just too deliberate. Not only that, the service weapon was surprisingly clean compared to the expanse of blood that stained the floor. Furthermore, there was no sign of forced entry. All of these puzzle pieces pointed to a homicide staged to look like something else. From the outside, it would have been easy to assume that Trooper Porter's life was perfectly in order. She had served the state police with distinction since her late 20s, forging a path in a male-dominated profession while raising her beloved daughter, Emily, as a single parent. Indeed, colleagues and friends admired her determination and dedication. They remembered her as someone who balanced long hours, overnight shifts, and demanding investigations with quiet empathy and a willingness to take on more than her fair share of work. Outside of her uniform, she was the kind of mother who never missed a school event, a parent-teacher meeting, or the chance to spend time with Emily during their cherished Friday night movie tradition. But beneath the surface of Lila's professional excellence and maternal devotion, she shouldered burdens she rarely discussed. After a difficult divorce, loneliness had settled around her like a permanent fog. She yearned for love and connection, and for a time, believed she had found it in the form of Senior Trooper Alan Hayes. Their initial interactions were innocent enough, bound by the camaraderie and mutual respect that can form between colleagues in a high-pressure environment. Alan, a man in his early 40s, was known for his calm authority, spotless record, and impressive track record in tricky situations. He was someone people naturally looked up to. The more time Lila spent around Alan, the more she grew to admire his self-assuredness. Alan, in turn, found in Lila a confidant who would listen to his frustrations and anxieties. Those frustrations revolved around his wife, Deborah Hayes, a schoolteacher widely respected for her charitable work. On the outside, their marriage looked like a portrait of stability. They had 2 young sons, regularly appeared in community newsletters and local papers, and even attended church events as a tight-knit family. Yet, according to Alan, their relationship was eroding. He confided to Lila that he felt stifled, trapped in a life that no longer brought him joy. They were more like cordial roommates than a husband and wife. Lila, who herself nursed a hidden fear that she was unworthy of love, saw in Alan a man who understood her. Their bond deepened quickly, crossing professional boundaries and blossoming into a clandestine affair. The relationship between Lila and Alan, though passionate, was hardly tranquil. The first rush of euphoria gave way to a mounting tension as they skirted the edge of exposure. Lila made it increasingly clear that she wanted more than stolen moments in unmarked cars and whispered phone calls. She wanted Alan by her side, truly, openly. Alan, however, was hesitant. His life was intricately tied to his marriage, his role in the community, and the impeccable reputation he had cultivated over nearly 2 decades in the force. Divorcing Deborah meant risking not just a domestic upheaval, but a social and professional downfall. By December 2007, the tension between Lila and Alan had begun to seep into the workplace. Fellow troopers noticed subtle changes in Lila, who seemed both happier and more anxious. Meanwhile, Alan's composure started to erode in small, telling ways. He snapped at junior officers over minor mistakes. He showed up late to meetings he once would have led with crisp punctuality. On more than one occasion, he was seen pacing, gazing blankly at the wall as though grappling with heavy thoughts. Still, neither publicly acknowledged any trouble. On the morning of Lila's death in February 2008, the tragic discovery rapidly became a high-priority investigation. Detective Garrett Lynch was among the first to notice glaring inconsistencies in the so-called suicide scene. Lila's service weapon was far too clean. The trajectory of the bullet and the angle of entry didn't match a self-inflicted wound. Her teenage daughter, Emily, mentioned that she had heard her mother arguing with someone from work in the days leading up to her death. The name Allen surfaced in phone records, text messages, and official logs. Lynch and his team methodically combed through evidence, beginning with Lila's phone and her email accounts. They hit a goldmine of information that painted a vivid picture of a secret affair turned explosive. Explicit emails detailed the intense connection between Lila and Allen, one that had swiftly shifted from romantic intimacy to stifling desperation. Some emails were tender, full of longing for a happier future. Others were fraught with resentment and ultimatums. If Allen didn't come clean about the affair soon, Lila threatened to do it for him. In those same exchanges, Allen pleaded for time and patience. He was panicking. The deeper the investigators dug into Allen's private life, the more complicated he seemed. Allen Hayes was not just a respected trooper and charismatic friend, but also a man whose personal life was on the brink of disaster. It turned out that he and Deborah had been married in their early 20s, each believing they had found a perfect partner. Over the years, however, Allen's professional ambitions consumed him. He arrived home late, sometimes after the children had already gone to bed. Deborah, for her part, filled her time with teaching and community service, investing in volunteer work at her local church and after-school programs. Their marriage slipped into an uneasy distance, polite on the surface but lacking the warmth it had once known. As soon as Allen learned of Lila's threats to reveal the affair, he grew increasingly agitated, even paranoid. There were whispered fights in quiet corners at the station, arguments that colleagues overheard fragments of but never quite pieced together. Emily Porter herself recalled one confrontation at her own house. Lila's raised voice, sharp and intense, and Allen's subdued but tense response. When Emily emerged from her room, she saw the tail end of that argument, a furious Lila storming upstairs while Allen left abruptly, not even looking her in the eye. At this point in the investigation, all signs directed suspicion toward Allen. Still, Detective Lynch knew better than to rush to arrest. He recognized that in a case involving two members of law enforcement, where the evidence might be scrutinized under the harshest possible light, he needed everything to be airtight. Then, on February 20, 2008, a forensic examination of Allen's car turned up an incriminating piece of evidence, a jacket containing gunpowder residue. Combined with CCTV footage showing Allen's car just blocks from Lila's home on the night of the murder, there was little doubt he had at least been near the scene. Emily Porter's additional statements only reinforced the timeline. She remembered seeing Allen's car in the driveway at unusual hours, as well as hearing muffled phone conversations between her mother and someone Emily believed was Allen. All the while, Emily remained deeply shaken, having lost her only parent to a brutal crime. She was a critical but traumatized witness who had to be handled with great care by the investigative team. But the case took yet another curve when detectives considered the potential role of Deborah Hayes. A witness had reported seeing a car similar to Deborah's, a black sedan with a telltale bumper sticker from a local Christian school, lurking near Lila's home close to the estimated time of the murder. Deborah, when questioned, produced an alibi stating she had spent the evening at home with her sons, helping them with homework and preparing for a church charity event. Although some aspects of her account checked out, certain details like the exact timeline felt incomplete. Had she discovered the affair? And if so, might she have confronted Lila in a jealous rage? Detective Lynch considered Deborah's potential motives. After all, Deborah was a devoted mother who prided herself on her family. The revelation of her husband's betrayal would have been a devastating blow, not just to her personal life, but to her carefully curated image as a respected teacher and community figure. Rumors swirled. Yet, Deborah had no criminal past, nor were there credible accounts of her exhibiting violent tendencies. Some acquaintances, though, hinted that she wasn't as calm and collected as she appeared, that under her courteous exterior lurked a sharp temper. With no conclusive evidence linking Deborah to the murder, the detectives could do little but keep a wary eye on her. Then a critical clue emerged: finances. In March 2008, the investigative team uncovered the fact that Deborah had recently inherited a large sum of money, $500,000, from her late father's estate. This windfall had been placed in a joint account with Allen. If Deborah chose to divorce him, he would lose access to it. The financial stakes for Allen were enormous. Not only could his career be ruined by an affair scandal, but he also stood to be stripped of the substantial sum that might have provided him with lasting stability. The motive now extended beyond the realm of scandal and heartbreak. If Lila revealed the affair, it could trigger a divorce, a demotion or dismissal from the force, and a catastrophic blow to Alan's finances and social standing. Fear and desperation could have pushed him to a final lethal decision. On March 8, 2008, the tipping point arrived. Further forensic tests confirmed that the bullet that killed Lila came from Alan's service weapon. That weapon, reported missing days before, was discovered at the murder scene, conspicuously clean except for Alan's fingerprints. The stage was set for an arrest. That morning at dawn, Lynch and his team executed the warrant. They descended upon the Hayes suburban home, lights flashing in the pre-dawn gloom. Deborah answered the door in her robe and slippers, her face marked by shock. Officers rushed in and Alan was handcuffed in front of his sons, who stood on the stairs, eyes wide with confusion. The neighborhood, once a quiet enclave of carefully maintained lawns, erupted with speculation. A man once admired, the golden boy of the local force, now wore cuffs and stared blankly at the ground as officers led him away. Back at the station, Alan was booked on first-degree murder charges. He kept silent, refusing to respond to questions and demanding a lawyer. Deborah, though questioned extensively, was not charged. Her alibi, coupled with the lack of concrete evidence tying her to the crime, left the door open to speculation but not an arrest. Nonetheless, the community buzzed with gossip. Was Deborah truly innocent? Or had she somehow aided Alan in covering his tracks? As days turned into weeks, the talk among law enforcement personnel continued unabated. A sense of betrayal pervaded the station. Many had respected Alan, even liked him. To imagine him murdering a colleague, and a woman he professed to have loved, seemed incomprehensible. Yet the evidence, from ballistic tests to digital forensics to witness accounts, was overwhelming. The trial began in August 2009. Word of a high-profile case involving state troopers spread quickly, and the courthouse was thronged by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The once poised Alan Hayes entered each day in a rumpled suit, the weight of his reality dragging at his posture. He avoided eye contact with reporters and bystanders who whispered about the depth of his betrayal. Marlene Carson, an assistant district attorney known for her sharp intellect and unyielding approach, led the prosecution. She told the court a gripping story of passion, betrayal, and fear. She laid out the financial timeline, pointing to the inheritance Deborah had received and explaining how Alan must have felt cornered. As she clicked through slides of crime scene photos, the jury took in every grim detail: the bloodstains on Lila's kitchen floor, the position of the firearm, the ballistic evidence establishing that it was Alan's missing service weapon. Carson emphasized that this was no impulsive act. It was deliberate, staged to look like a suicide. A poignant moment came when Emily Porter took the stand. Dressed somberly, her demeanor heartbreakingly composed, she described the heartbreak of losing her mother and hinted at the tension she had witnessed between Lila and Alan. She recalled overhearing her mother pleading for honesty while Alan demanded secrecy. Emily spoke of hearing the two raise their voices, followed by her mother pacing restlessly in her room. The entire courtroom, from jurors to spectators, seemed to hold its breath as Emily recounted discovering her mother's body. The hush in the room carried the profound weight of her trauma. The defense, led by Paul Grayson, attempted to cast doubt. Grayson argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the presence of Alan's fingerprints on the gun didn't necessarily mean he had pulled the trigger, and that gunpowder residue could be transferred in multiple ways. He hinted that Deborah might have been the one to pull the trigger out of jealousy, or at the very least that her involvement could not be ruled out. But Deborah took the stand under immunity and denied any role in the killing, painting herself as a stunned wife just beginning to grasp the extent of her husband's betrayal. Her testimony proved crucial. She admitted that she had discovered unsettling messages between Lila and Alan shortly before the murder but claimed she confronted Alan only verbally. Deborah insisted that she was heartbroken but had never harbored violent thoughts. In describing Alan's demeanor, she recalled how distant he had become in the weeks before Lila's death, disappearing late at night, returning home brooding and silent. She had asked him point-blank if he was seeing someone else, and though he denied it initially, Deborah had grown suspicious. The prosecution further pointed out that Deborah's car, while it matched the eyewitness account in general make and bumper sticker, could not be definitively placed at the crime scene. No conclusive forensic evidence such as footprints or DNA tied her to Lila's house. Ultimately, the suggestion that Deborah had a direct hand in the murder remained a theory without sufficient traction. As the case progressed, the weight of evidence against Alan Hayes mounted. The ballistic match, the suspicious timing of his missing weapon, the jacket with residue, and the phone records indicating he had been near Lila's home on the night in question. Several of Alan's colleagues, once friends and admirers, testified about his erratic behavior leading up to the crime. One recalled how Alan had snapped angrily at him without provocation the week before Lila's death, something completely out of character. After weeks of testimony, exhibits, and impassioned arguments, the jury entered deliberation. On a cold October morning in 2009, they delivered their verdict. Alan Hayes was guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In that final moment, Alan's shoulders sagged as he stared blankly ahead. For the spectators, it was a moment of closure, or so it seemed. Some left the courthouse feeling justice had been done, while others walked away shaking their heads, disbelieving that the once acclaimed trooper had fallen so far. The fallout was immeasurable. Within the state police, morale took a hit. A sense of betrayal rippled through the department. At the heart of their organization, a trooper had violated the core principle to protect and serve. As the news spread, the scandal became fodder for television segments and newspaper headlines across New England. Deborah Hayes, reeling from public scorn and private heartbreak, moved away to start anew with her children, leaving behind a swirl of unanswered questions about what she had known, and when. For Emily Porter, the guilty verdict offered a somber relief. Though justice was served, it would never bring her mother back. She moved in with an aunt and uncle out of state, finding in them the familial stability she so desperately needed. Over time, Emily decided to speak out publicly about domestic violence and emotional manipulation, using her own story as an example of how quickly a situation can escalate. She participated in forums, spoke with advocacy groups, and dedicated her future studies to understanding criminal psychology. In every talk, she emphasized the cracks that can appear in relationships, especially when secrets and fear collide. The trial concluded, but the haunting echoes of the crime lingered in Hanover. Rumors persisted about Deborah's potential involvement, though no hard evidence ever emerged to charge her. Whispers circulated that perhaps Alan had enlisted her unwitting help or that Deborah had found out about the affair long before she claimed to have. Others believed wholeheartedly that Alan acted alone, gripped by fear and self-preservation. In the end, no further arrests were made. Years passed, and the memory of Lila's murder still haunted local news channels anytime there was an anniversary or new development. Occasional interviews with Detective Garrett Lynch revealed that he carried the memory of the case with him. He spoke of how the evidence had seemed to align from the start, how the staging of the suicide had been done clumsily yet deliberately. He expressed sympathy for Emily, who had lost her mother in the most horrifying way. At times, he also expressed pity for Alan, describing him as a man who could have chosen a different path at so many junctures but allowed desperation to devour him. What truly drove a man like Alan Hayes to pull the trigger remains a subject of contemplation among those who followed the case. Some point strictly to finances, highlighting the inheritance as the final factor that led him to believe he had no other choice. Others see the seeds of tragedy in his strained marriage. A man who felt unseen at home, who found solace in a woman facing her own loneliness. The question of whether Alan's betrayal was purely about fear of exposure or if other, darker impulses played a role remains open for speculation. To this day, the story of Trooper Alan Hayes and Trooper Lila Porter stands as a grim reminder that beneath the veneer of respectability, even those sworn to uphold the law can harbor secrets capable of dismantling lives. It underscores how passion, betrayal, and desperation can combine to forge deadly outcomes, shattering families and leaving communities reeling. In a place like Hanover, once lauded for its serenity and civic pride, the case lingers in collective memory. Residents still recall how the media vans lined their streets, how cameras captured Alan led away in handcuffs, how Emily Porter quietly slipped into the crowd, forever marked by an unimaginable tragedy. In the aftermath, local organizations came together to honor Lila's memory. A small scholarship fund in her name was established for young women pursuing careers in law enforcement. Her colleagues organized an annual 5K run, the proceeds of which went to support families impacted by violent crimes. Lila's life, though cut short, became a symbol of the dedication and risks inherent in policing, and of the danger that can sometimes come from within. For Emily, the road to healing was long and fraught with anxiety, depression, and survivor's guilt. She clung to the memory of her mother's unwavering support and kind-hearted nature. In time, those memories became the cornerstone of her resilience. She found a way to channel her grief into advocacy, giving talks at schools and youth programs. She warned others about the subtleties of emotional manipulation, the precariousness of secret relationships, and the destructive potential of letting fear dictate choices. Her story became a powerful testament to the importance of accountability and the deadly cost of deception. Meanwhile, Alan Hayes began his life sentence, confined to a prison cell, where the relentless quiet and monotony stood in stark contrast to his former position of authority. The once proud trooper was now just another inmate, living with the knowledge that he had destroyed both his own life and the life of a woman who had cared for him, all while leaving irreparable emotional damage for his children. The faint glimmer of contact with them was overshadowed by a sense of disgrace, as Deborah eventually limited any communication, hoping to shield her sons from the weight of their father's sins. To the public, he became an infamous figure, a cautionary tale recounted by those who remembered him from better days. Although the trial ended with a verdict, the discussion of the Hayes Porter affair and murder remains a topic of local lore. The sensational details, an illicit affair between colleagues, a financial motive connected to a staggering inheritance, and the tragic fact that one of law enforcement's own was murdered, sustain an uneasy fascination among true crime enthusiasts. Podcasts, documentaries, and even a few tabloid articles revisit the story every now and then, each seeking the angles that might have been missed or the motivations that still seem too murky to be fully explained. In Hanover, however, the mania of immediate media attention has died down. The community has, in many respects, moved on, focusing on everyday life and the small but meaningful acts that restore faith in each other. Yet, old-timers and long-time residents will occasionally bring up the case in hushed tones or point out the house where Lila once lived. They'll note how it remains empty or was eventually sold to new occupants who may or may not know of the tragedy that took place there. People do not forget the day the sirens blared before sunrise, nor do they forget the image of Detective Lynch emerging from that home with a silent, determined expression on his face. The sense that a beloved member of their community was betrayed, and by a man she once trusted, still stings. And in that way, Lila's story has become cautionary as well. It stands as an example of how secrets can metastasize, how an extramarital relationship in a high-stress field can lead to cataclysmic consequences, and how even the best among us are not immune to the corrosive pull of desperation. The notion that a simple series of decisions, beginning with flirtation, continuing through hidden messages and culminating in betrayal, could end in murder is a stark reminder of how fragile and precious life is, and how quickly trust can be shattered when someone is cornered by their own misdeeds. For the people who followed the case from start to finish, it serves as a reminder. Sometimes those charged with enforcing the law fail to uphold it in the most tragic way. Sometimes the face of the killer is someone who once stood for safety and justice. And while justice was ultimately served through the courts, the lingering sense of loss will never be fully rectified. Emily Porter lost her mother, Deborah Hayes lost her marriage and the life she thought she knew, the New Hampshire State Police lost one of their own, both in life and to a life behind bars. The final lesson is profound, if heartbreaking. Love, when entangled with deception, can morph into a force that destroys everything in its path. What began as an emotional bond between two vulnerable individuals ended with a bullet, leaving a web of grief and betrayal that would never fully unravel. The small town of Hanover will forever carry the memory of Trooper Lila Porter's life and death, a silent caution to those who underestimate how dangerous human desperation can become. So ends the tale of how a respected trooper, a hidden affair, and a desperate bid to keep the truth under wraps resulted in a murder that rocked an entire community. Even as justice was done, the questions linger. Could someone have stepped in earlier? Could Lila have been protected had the affair been exposed sooner? Could Alan have chosen a different, less destructive route for himself and his family? The answers remain elusive. But the memory of that February morning, of Emily's frightened call to 911, and of Alan Hayes' eventual conviction, stand as an enduring reminder that while secrets might temporarily shield us from consequence, they can just as easily pave the way to our own downfall. Like and subscribe for more videos, and thank you for letting me share.